Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of the Cabinet Committee for Housing on Monday, the 31st of October, from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. Time is now 10 o'clock. My name is Councillor Paula Ferguson. I'm the chairperson of this committee, the deputy leader, and the Cabinet member for Community and Housing. I'd also like to welcome onto this committee my fellow councillors, cabinet colleagues, Councillor Power and Councillor Gordon-Smith, and also my fellow councillor colleagues, Councillor Horrell, Councillor Clear, Councillor Scott and Councillor Batho. And importantly, I'd very much like to welcome our two TACT representatives, Mr. Light and Mr. Chafe. They will be permanent members of this committee. In the room, we have a number of officers who will be assisting us today, including Mr. Bothan, Mrs. Knight, Amber Russell, Mr. Palmer, and Deborah Sunley. There are also a number of other officers in the room, and our thanks will go at the forefront also to Nancy from Democratic Services, who always will assist us ably in this meeting. I do have a few, I'd also like to welcome those who have come to listen to the meeting in the room and those who are listening online. And also to Mr. Tate, who will be speaking in public participation, and also to Councillor Wallace, who I know will be speaking to one of the items. I now will go on to the housekeeping points to make before we begin. Please can I advise that the open parts of the meeting are being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting is being made and will be publicly available shortly afterwards. If you watch the video recording of this meeting on your YouTube and wish to read subtitles, you can do this by going to Playback and Performance in your YouTube settings and checking the boxes to always show captions and to include audio-generated captions. Please can I remind all participants to speak clearly and to remember to use your microphones. In addition, please speak directly into the microphone and do not turn away when speaking. This will ensure your comments are picked up for the audio and video recording, as well as improving the audibility in the room. Please can I also ask everyone to ensure that their mobile phones and other electronic devices are on silent or switched off entirely. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow any instructions given to you by staff or the fire marshals. All fire exits are marked by green exit signs. Please proceed quickly and calmly to the assembly point, which is in Abbey Gardens, and do not use the lift. I've already welcomed everybody to the meeting. I would just like to remind Mr. Tate that you will have 3 minutes to make your contribution, and there will be a timer at that time. It's worth also just adding, for the benefit of the members of the public that are here with us today, and also those listening online, but item 6 includes exempt appendices, and should the committee wish to discuss their contents, then we will have to ask all members of the public to leave the meeting. When we have finished, we will come back into open session, and if you wish to rejoin us at this point, you will be more than welcome to do so. Whilst we are discussing the exempt appendices, we will ask you to stay outside the meeting room if you're with us today. Of course, I would understand if you don't want to hang around to return after that exempt part of the meeting, but I hope that you will. Okay, right, now turning to the agenda, and I know that was a very long introduction, but this is either we could consider it a new committee or a resurrected. Right, the first item on the agenda is apologies. Do you have any apologies?
No, we don't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next item, item 2, is disclosure of interest. Do you have any disclosures of interest? No? Thank you very much, everybody. We have already noted that Councillor Wallace, you would wish to speak. Do you wish to speak now, or do you wish to speak to a specific item? On item 6, thank you, Councillor Wallace. We'll now turn to public participation. I believe, Mr. Tate, you wanted to speak at the beginning of the meeting and not to a specific item. Is that correct? Okay. Well, please come forward, and good to see you again, Mr. Tate.
Madam Chair, I'm grateful for the opportunity to address the re-established Cabinet Housing Committee. Thank you. And it's great to have another enthusiastic supporter of affordable housing. So that's great news. I'm certain that reverting back to having a committee specifically dealing with housing matters offers clarity and simplicity for all concerned, and will be very helpful for the good management of over 5,000 council homes, the biggest element of what this council does. It's great to see TACT as members, sitting members of this committee, which is so necessary. I want to celebrate the success of the New Homes programme to date and commend Council for the target of 1,000 new homes between 2021 and 2030. I feel I know the district well, and when looking through the future programme, I want to strongly suggest that for the unallocated housing numbers, the Council considers finding enough land for a brand new 21st century council estate, which I think would need to be close to Winchester and not in the southern parishes. Looking back at the history of council housing, where Winchester played a very important role, delivering significant numbers of new homes wasn't achieved through small-scale piecemeal development, but by building large estates of new homes. Just look at Stanmore, Winnell, Highcliffe, Week, or more recently Abbots Barton. I have consistently argued over the last 7 years that the council should secure control of a large site where perhaps 1,000 or more new homes could be built, thus removing the uncertainty from many communities as to whether there will be development near them. This would allow for the proper delivery of a comprehensive infrastructure for the new estate, whereas, for example, the 77 new homes in Stanmore in the Valley didn't trigger any community infrastructure levy, as affordable housing doesn't incur that liability. Therefore, Stanmore lost valuable open space for new homes, but without the commensurate community benefit, which would have been around £1 million. The same could be said for Winnell and the 76 new homes being built there. It is clear from pretty much every resident survey undertaken, most people in Winchester support the increased provision of more inclusive and affordable housing. Therefore, allocating a larger site may be the best way to achieve this aspiration. The big question is, where will that development be? I would ask Cabinet to be brave here and give a clear message to Winchester that significant numbers of new homes are desperately needed and will be delivered, and to explain to them potentially where those homes will be. So thank you very much, and I absolutely welcome having this committee back in situ. I think that's a really wise move. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate, and thank you for your positive comments, both around the re-establishment of this committee and also of our ambition, our commitment to building new affordable homes. When we come to the presentation, I will ask Mr. Palmer to address your point regarding the opportunity potentially, or whether it's something to be looked at more closely, whether we could indeed look to build a large new estate. Obviously, there are pressures currently, inflationary pressures, interest rate pressures that may make that more difficult than it was a few months ago, but I will certainly ask Mr. Palmer to address this point. Thank you very much indeed. Just before we move on to item 5, we've missed out Chairperson's announcement, and I did have one announcement to make today. I need to just find the document. Laptop. When I took over as Cabinet Member for Community and Housing, councillors raised with me a concern about flooding in Bishop's Waltham. I promised to look into this concern for them and to ensure that we had an action plan. So I'm pleased to announce today that following last year's flooding at Bishop's Waltham, I can report that flood defence work at both Blanchard Road and Claylands Road are nearing completion. The fencing and gates at the rear of the 5 properties in Blanchard Road at risk of flooding have been replaced with a robust 900mm high dual brick thickness wall with new picket gates. Similar style of works carried out at Sycamore Road last year, which has proven to be effective. The gate apertures have been protected with easily deployable Nautilus flood barriers designed to allow the residents to deploy them in the event of flooding. Fresh fencing is also being installed on top of the new walls and should be completed by the end of the week, February the 4th of November. At Claylands Road, wet room drainage has been upgraded to the affected properties with a non-return valve to prevent the floodwater coming up through the exposed drainage pipework, with further Nautilus flood barriers scheduled to be installed next week, Monday the 7th of November. Property services are also planning a longer term on widening flood prevention solutions in this area. And again, I'm waiting for a report due back on that. But I just wanted the committee to know that this issue was raised and action has been taken to protect our residents and to protect both their homes in that area. Right, if we now move on to item 5, which is our New Homes Programme update and presentation. This will be a standing item on this committee. So we will be, as a committee, be able to consider where we're at each of our meetings during the course of this year. Mr. Palmer, are you going to be giving the presentation or is it Ms.
Yes, Chair.
You will. Thank you very much. If you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. So as you can see on the screen, this is a quick run through of where we're at with our housing new homes programme. What I intend to do is just do a brief overview of our programme, a couple of schemes that were on site, a couple of future challenges that we face, and then I propose to take questions at the end, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, indeed. But when we come to questions, I'll ask you to try and address Mr. Tate's question first,
Okay.
as I know he's not here for the whole meeting today.
Thank you. Okay. So in terms of the first slide, it looks at the council priorities. And what I was doing here is really setting the context for our housing development programme. So we have the council priorities about net zero carbon challenge, which is prominent in the council's plan to address that, and also to provide homes for all. So our current development programme addresses both of those priorities, and I'll go on to give you a couple of examples as we move on through the presentation. But that's the context to what we do and how our programme fits. So moving on, the next slide is a very quick summary of our housing development strategy. That was approved by Cabinet in March 2021, and its priority is healthy homes, good for the people and the planet. So when we start to talk about some of the homes that we are building in the future, they are healthy homes, they're in healthy environments, and as part of that process, we invest in the surrounds for those houses as well as those houses themselves. So that just reiterates what our target is. It's 1,000 new homes between 2021 and 2030, addressing the climate emergency and again building to high quality. So moving on. The next slide, it's probably not that clear, but hopefully if you've got the presentation on your laptop, you can see that that's where all the schemes that we have built, we are on site with, and where we intend to build in the future. And as you can see, it's a fairly wide geographical spread across the district. We don't just concentrate in Winchester, which is actually where most of our housing need is generated from, but we build across the district. Areas that we haven't built in, and certainly like Denmead and that particular area is being served by the new major development area, and so a lot of housing associations are building in that area. So whilst the council may not have built there, housing associations are. So let's have a look at our current statistics. So for those of you who remember, in 2012 was when the New Homes programme was launched. Our initial target was to build 300 homes in 10 years, which I'm glad to say that we have achieved. We actually completed, in the first 9 years of the programme, 250 homes. We then reset the target in 2021. So far, of that new target, we've now completed 121 homes. We're on site with a further 130. We've got 6 subject to tender approval, which you'll hear about next on the agenda. And some schemes have been submitted for planning, and as well as over 300 homes in negotiation with various developers. So this is, I thought I'd just show you a couple of slides about the current, where we are on site at the moment. And Winnell Flats, some of you will be familiar with, 76 new homes there, 2 blocks of flats, 3 houses, built to highly efficient energy standards, a mixture of rent and shared ownership. We're still working on proposals to bring forward a sub-market rent with one of the blocks. And that links back very well to the council priorities about homes for all. So it is about providing a mixed community at Winnell. There'll be shared ownership and there'll be sub-market rent, and aimed at a slightly different category of people that we perhaps housed in the past. So it broadens out our housing offer. And going back to an earlier point, we have created, have improved, should I say, the surrounds to the flats, the Winnell Flats. So we've invested close to £1 million in improving the green area around all the flats to service both the new and the existing residents. So I think it's a very exciting project, which will be completed in about this time next year, November 2023. Moving on. The second scheme we're on site with at the moment is at Whiteley, where we've bought 54 homes from Drew Smith Contractors, 27 rented and 27 shared ownership. Majority are houses. They're built to AECB low energy standards, so again, minimal running costs, minimal energy costs for tenants. The first handover is later in November, 25th of November, and we'll be taking forward a series of rolling handovers up until June 2023. So that's a very exciting project on a new and emerging community. So hopefully, it will be a very attractive offer for tenants in our southern parishes. So let's have a quick look at the schemes in development. We've got, well, there's the list up there. Just say a few words. Dyson Drive, Gorner House, Woodman Close, and Witherbed Lane have all been submitted for planning consent. Consent won't be granted until we've found a solution to nutrient mitigation, and I'll come on to say a few words about that in a minute. So they are in planning at the moment, and the 2 last schemes are quite interesting in that we are having active conversations with the developers down at Whiteley and at Kings Barton to provide extra care and future extra care schemes there. So again, very important provision for the elderly, Winchester, and again for our southern parishes. So let's quick look at future opportunities. This is some of the things we'll be working on currently. So again, we're finding demand for our garages. Council house garages are, again, it's falling and has been for a number of years. So we continue to look at surplus garage sites where they can deal with the issue of antisocial behaviour, as well as provide new housing for people. So we're working on a couple of those schemes. The opportunities that will be created from the development of the 2 extra care schemes that I just mentioned at Whiteley and Abbots at Kings Barton will allow us then to look at our existing sheltered housing schemes and potentially remodel some of those. So that will be come forward once we've secured the opportunities and built out the extra care schemes that we mentioned. The next scheme is obviously, well, the next series of schemes are more strategic sites that will come forward over the next few years. So it should read Sir John Moore Barracks. I don't know why it's come out St John Moore. I bet he'd be a bit upset about that. So those opportunities will come forward as part of our local plan over the next few years. All of those sites potentially will have affordable housing, and which the council could deliver. They could be delivered by RPs, but again, we could deliver them as part of our New Homes programme. And also, we need to continue to look at rural exception sites. There's still parishes in this district who haven't had rural exception sites, so I think we'd like to reopen conversations with parish councils about delivering extra rural exception sites. In the past, we've tended to deliver those through housing associations, but now we have the opportunity to deliver them. So I think that's, a conversation we'll be having.
Sorry, Mr. Palmer, can you explain for people listening what a rural exception site is?
Yes. Currently, the boundaries for development around settlements are drawn very tightly, especially in rural areas. And it means that it's very difficult to provide affordable housing in rural communities. What a rural exception site is a settlement just the other side of the development boundary. So it normally wouldn't get permission unless it was for 100% affordable housing. So they're usually quite small schemes attached to villages, which are built purely and solely for affordable housing for local people. So let's have a look at some of the future challenges we're facing at the moment. Obviously, the last probably 6 months, the viability of projects has been severely impacted by interest rate rises. We've all seen it. We've all seen the news. We can all take a view on when they may stop increasing, but at the moment, they are still increasing. And the way we calculate our viability for new schemes is based on the cost of funding those schemes, just in the same way as the cost of a mortgage for people. We also have a significant challenge with build cost inflation. So at the moment, it's increasing by about 10% per quarter. So it's actually increased 40% over the last year alone. And that's a combination of factors, not least the fact that a lot of our building materials are brought in from abroad. And we've had the challenge of Brexit, the challenge of COVID, and now the challenge of war in Ukraine, all of which are impacting significantly on costs. And also renting, the challenge of rent increases. So I think members will have a report later this month or early November and about potential rent increases for next year, but they're clearly going to be less than inflation. And certainly the government have issued a consultation document about what they potentially could be, but it won't match what our increased costs are. The next point is about land supply, and going back to Mr. Tate's point, we can't build houses without having the land to build them on, and we've been lucky. We've built a lot on land that the council's owned, but we will at some stage need to buy land, and buying land is risky and expensive, so we need to look at that issue. There is also a lack of capacity in the construction industry at the moment. A lot of labourers have left and not come back after COVID. There's increasing failure of small builders. The failure rate is about 25% of small SME builders at the moment. So that whole capacity in the sector is going. And finally, as I've touched on before, is about environmental legislation and how we are now, all of our houses have to provide biodiversity net gain. So that's putting back more nature than we take away. And the issue of nutrient neutrality, where we have to mitigate now for phosphates and nitrates, which are generated by a housing development. Again, is a significant challenge. So finally, any questions?
Councillor Power, if you'd like to start us off, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have 6 questions, 4 of which relate to the energy efficiency housing we are developing. 3 of which. How are we, where is the value of AECB housing versus passive house regarding energy usage, so that we can see the comparative of how much tenants can expect to have to pay for power? How are we collecting the tenant experience of the low energy housing? And how do we value our new energy efficient housing stock when it comes to quantifying the value of our estates?
Mr. Palmer, do you want to take those in turn? Thank you.
I will do, thank you. AEC versus passive house. Both of them are very high energy standards. It's worth saying that immediately. We've adopted those standards as the benchmark, providing excellent energy efficiency. I think passive house is regarded as the benchmark for energy efficient homes. You're looking at savings of 95% for tenants on their daily energy costs by building it to passive house standard. And basically the principle is that the thermal efficiency of that home is the best it can be. It's in effect pressure tested, and so the benchmark is that it only loses 0.5 of a bar of pressure, whereas a normally constructed home will be looking at about 5 or 8 pounds per pressure. So you can see that they are designed to be almost heated up by the occupants in the property. It's not losing any heat. There are obviously question marks about how healthy that is, but the health is maintained by fresh air being continually brought into the property, and we use the warm, stale air to heat the cold air coming from outside. Is effectively how a passive house works. Doesn't mean you can't open the windows or the door or anything like that. It just means that it's you're not losing any heat that's generated. So that's a passive house. That's the top standard, as it were. AECB is a slightly lower standard to that, because sometimes we're not able to achieve a passive house standard because of the layout of the building or the heating available. So, for instance, using Whiteley as an example, we weren't able to instruct the contractor to build them to passive house standard because there wasn't enough electricity in the network down there. So we had to adopt a slightly lower standard, which is AECB, and we've had to keep the gas heating in there, for example. So AECB is probably second in terms of its efficiency to passive house. So that's the difference between the two of them. They're both very efficient and much better than the Future Home Standard, which the government is currently consulting on. So in terms of measuring the tenant experience, part of our passive house project, pilot project, which you'll hear about on the agenda next, is part of that whole process is monitoring how much we're saving tenants. So it's a Passive House Plus project, which means we're going to be looking over the next year at the energy usage from tenants, the living experience, the maintenance experience as well, because there's quite a lot of this is new technology as well. So that will be measured as part of our pilot project, and the lessons that we learn from it can be fed back into future projects. Moving on to the question of value, It's a challenge because when a valuer compares two properties, they look at market comparables. There isn't market comparable, very few market comparables to passive house. Apparently, I was reading a report that Deborah made, there's only 1,500 potential passive houses in the country. So there's no way we can compare. The market hasn't caught up with the value yet of those properties. So that's a challenge when we come to do our viability, because one of the things we say, well, you know, do we build new or do we buy off the shelf? Well, we can't buy passive houses off the shelf at the moment, so it's a very difficult test.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer, for those comprehensive answers. Just in terms of speaking about the Whiteley homes, I had the opportunity to go and visit one of those homes last week with leader Councillor Todd. And what struck me is, even though the house yet doesn't have carpets or curtains, there was no heating on. When we were inside that property that's almost ready for occupation, it was extremely warm. I know temperatures aren't that cold outside at the moment, but it was almost, we wanted to open a window. So, and also I have already spoken to Mr. Palmer and the team about making sure we do actually monitor what it's like to live in the house for the tenants, as much as what we learn about energy consumption and everything else. Just before I move on to Councillor Scott, who has the next question, I just wanted to remind members of the committee that we will only be taking questions on this for a maximum of another 10 minutes, because we do then need to move on. We have quite a lot to get through to today. Mr. Tate specifically raised the question around whether or not the council should be looking to build a new council estate rather than taking packages of lands within other estates, and then that question of whether we ask someone else to help us develop or whether we develop ourselves. I'm not sure, Mr. Palmer, that you addressed that. You certainly addressed the issue of when we do build, do we also invest in the area around the buildings to create communities, to create homes? And your comments about Winnell are welcome, because indeed I know very clearly the amount of investment that is going in around those flats, around that block of flats. I also believe that in Stanmore there was development of a nature trail, but maybe not to the same extent. But could you address the point about, should we be looking to acquire a significant amount of land to build council homes, or are thinking around that? Thank you.
Clearly, it's more efficient to provide housing on a bulk scale, and uses far less staff time and staff resources. So it's always good to have larger schemes come forward. And as I went back to one of my earlier points about land supply, our challenge is going to be competing with the private sector to buy land. However, we are the planning authority, so if we think there's a reasonable chance of land coming available at a later stage, then I think that it would make a lot of sense to buy a large site, and it's something that we will continue to look for, because with a larger site you can make sure all the correct infrastructure goes in at the right stage, so you can plan schools, roads, open space and all the other facilities which make a community, which is very difficult to do when you're dealing with much smaller schemes, of say 10 homes, 20 homes. It's always much more difficult and much more costly to put that infrastructure in. So it makes a lot of sense to look for a large site. We will continue to do so, and if we find one, we'll come back to members to talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Botham, did you want to clarify the comment around planning, please?
Well, it wasn't going to be a comment around planning. It's really just a supplementary to Mr. Palmer's point that he was making there, and that's that the New Homes programme that Cabinet have already approved, the existing New Homes programme, does include provision, I think, of several £1 million set aside for land acquisition. So we've identified that as a priority. We've included the provision within the programme, and Mr. Palmer's team and the estates team are working together, looking at opportunities when they arise. Active discussions on a number of potential options as we speak, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Botham. Mr. Tate, We've taken your points on board, and you know, I absolutely understand the desire for all the reasons that Mr. Palmer expresses. There is money available, but land is incredibly expensive, as you know, particularly around Winchester. Mr. Councillor Scott, sorry, apologies.
That's okay, Chair. Thank you. Andrew, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to sort of ask you about how we as a council decide on who we build these houses for. You mentioned a community mix and homes for all. Do we just look at our existing housing allocation? Do we take in consideration the two universities with a phenomenal amount of students who could do with really up-to-date student accommodation? And do we look at our future young people who would really cherish a social house in their early stage of to existence within their current communities? And where do your up-to-date programme, where does it fit in with the local plan that's being put together? Does it fit quite comfortably, or is there still much more determination that yourself and members need to do to ensure that all old council estates areas in the town are being well looked after in regards to the loss of family houses that we've experienced over the last 10 to 20 years?
Thank you. So our corporate and council plan clearly says it's about homes for all. So I think we recognise now that what we build, there has to be a mix of what we build. And so we build, whatever we build, we'll allocate at the end of the day. There's demand for everything. But we make sure that the programme is mixed. It's mixed in terms of the sizes of the properties we build, a mix in where we build it, and also a mix of tenure now. So increasingly we are building more shared ownership properties, and they've been extremely popular. So for instance, with the Valley, they've all been sold now, all of the shared ownership properties on there, at Kingsworthy, where we built some shared ownership, and in central Winchester. So clearly there is a demand from first-time buyers for shared ownership properties, and so we will continue to do that. With the Winnell scheme, as I've already mentioned, we're building for singles and couples at a sub-market rent. So again, a high-quality, well-managed, well-maintained property, but again at a slightly different market. So it's again for meeting that gap for people who wouldn't normally apply for affordable housing, but want good quality accommodation and have the means to pay for it within Winchester. So I think we are trying to broaden our offer to residents in Winchester, and the example is on the ground and being delivered at the moment. So that picks up the point about young people. That I think that's what we're doing, and it'll be really interesting when we come to Winnell in a year's time what the demand for those properties is going to be, and the type of people that go into them. Picking up on the issue around the local plan, again, going back to our development strategy, we build homes for people that make sure that the environment that they're placed in is as good as we can make it. So we invest quite considerable sums of money to improve other residents' lives around any new development that we put in. I don't think we're at odds with the local plan. I think we recognise more than private developers the need for good quality, high quality neighbourhoods, and so that's what we tend to achieve. And I think that in terms of family homes, the stock of family homes that we've got on our estates is extremely important to be used for families, and that's why our extra care schemes, I think, are really important that we're building, because we should be encouraging people who can probably, or finding it very difficult to heat their properties, they're very large 3-bedroom homes in the future, fact that we can offer really high quality accommodation for older people to move to, for downsizers, I think is extremely important moving forward. And we can retain then and re-let those properties for families.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mrs. Knight, could you perhaps comment for Councillor Scott, because we are currently looking at our housing strategy. There's a piece of work going on, and I know, Councillor Scott, you are very passionate. Indeed, we've had a conversation around the potential loss of family homes because of the impact of increasing number of HMOs, and indeed a new phenomenon, the increasing number of homes being lost for Airbnbs. But I believe the housing strategy is being relooked at. Perhaps you could say more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, our current housing strategy is due to expire next year. So we're already starting a piece of work around consultation, which will involve members and lead members. And we have commissioned that piece of work to do all of the research with us. We've scoped the strategy, and it is very much really around the type of work that Mr. Palmer is discussing, as well as obviously the work that we do for tenants. So it will be around homes for all. It will be very inclusive. We also, there is a desire for young people to stay in the area, as you've mentioned, for students that have qualified and want to stay. So we will certainly be looking at younger persons housing, but the strategy covers a number of things. It will obviously encompass homelessness and all the normal functions that we provide. Our tenants' health and well-being is extremely important to us, and we've had introduced a new tenancy sustainment team, which Mrs. Russell will be discussing later. So we will, but it is very much at a consultation stage. It's very much gathering evidence, data, comparing us to our neighbours, and looking at trying to sort of scope out what our priorities will be. But they will be done with member involvement, officer involvement, and our stakeholders' involvement. And we will be bringing a paper to the Business Housing and Policy Committee this month.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Horrell, I'm conscious that I've run out of my 10 minutes. I know you often have a series of questions you'd like to ask. Can I please ask you to limit it to your top two? And then I will check with both Mr. Light and Mr. Chafe if there's anything they would like to ask, and then we will be moving on from this item. So just your top two, please, Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Palmer and the team for the very informative presentation. Always keen to understand the focus that we have on new homes, which we're an important part of our work. Chair, I think there are a couple of questions I'd focus on given the time constraint. The first of those is the standards that we're building to, and we'll come to that dilemma in item 6 on the agenda. The very best standard is expensive, and sadly at the moment we have limited resources of people who can provide that service and the costs. And when we look at the financials for the new scheme, as much as I'm supportive of it, it's obviously a challenge for us as a council. So I think there's a question that maybe this committee or another body within the council needs to address, and that is the standard that we want to build to for our new projects. We have a number today that are at different standards, and that's not a criticism, it's just a statement of where we are, but a question about what are we going to aim for and what can we afford to do, because we have the dilemma of needing homes.
Sorry, Councillor Horrell, I think we have the question.
Thank
so
you.
If you
and
just
the second
contain
question,
it to questions rather than making comments. Thank you.
I just need to set the context, Chair, thank you. And then the second question I have is one of our strategy for buying off the shelf versus building for ourselves. We've clearly bought 54 at Whiteley. That delivers them more quickly. I understand that is a positive. But what is that strategy given that they're not incremental to the overall stock coming into the district? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes, I mean, it's a very valid question and a question for debate. What do we build to? It is more expensive to build passive houses and houses to AECB standards. We could save money by building to lower standards, but that is a question mark about what impact that has on the environment and even the quality of life for our tenants. So, and it is a point of debate. We can build cheaper. There's nothing you can't build cheaper. It's whether it still achieves the standards that you want to achieve. In terms of the second point, buying off the shelf. So there's two aspects to this, I see. First one is where we buy directly from developers. I think that does have a place. It provides very quick supply. We usually get them at a discount. Well, we have got them at a discount, substantial discount to the market value. What we lose out is the opportunity to make them how we want them to be. So we are literally buying them off the shelf, and there are issues with the properties that we've bought at Whiteley, which we wouldn't have designed for our tenants, but we've had to accept them because they're coming off the shelf. So there are compromises, but there are plus points in that we can spend our money and house people a lot quicker. If you look at other acquisitions that we could make, we could buy properties off existing council estates, for example. But when I've done comparisons of values, we're paying the same per square metre for a new build as we would if we bought houses on our estates. And that's today's figures. So literally, we're building passive houses at a cost per square metre, which is exactly the same as the cost of buying less good quality properties, existing homes. So again, there's some interesting comparisons to be done there. And I suppose it's part of our programme to be flexible and adaptable to where the market is at any one time.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Obviously, with the issue about the quality of the homes we build, we have been very clear as an administration of our ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. Building homes that are carbon neutral is part of meeting that ambition. There's also an issue around making sure we build our homes, and I think it was a member of TACT who said this to me: why wouldn't we build home to the highest standard we possibly could for the future, for future generations? We know we have a significant issue around retrofitting what was built in the past. We could build to a slightly lower standard, but then we would have an issue around retrofitting to come, and we'd also be putting carbon into the atmosphere, which we don't want to do. I would suggest, Mr. Palmer, that because this is a topic for debate, and thank you, Councillor Horrell, for bringing it, that when we come to the item at the next Cabinet Housing Committee on the New Homes Programme, we specifically have a section that looks at this issue, so this committee can have that discussion, have that debate. Councillor Horrell, would that work for you?
That would be most welcome, Chair. Thank you.
And also, it's very important that we have TACT with us here today at the table. Mr. Chafe, Mr. Light, I have thoroughly gone over the time I'd allocated, but is there anything you wanted to add?
One comment. Are you on target to build the highest standard energy efficient homes by 2030?
That's a good question. We have a number of opportunities, clearly, of homes coming forward. The challenge is going to be the necessary allocation of budget to build those homes. So we can design and specify them, but it's going to need more investment than's currently allocated in the housing revenue account. So I think that's one of the challenges that we're going to have to think about.
Indeed, Mr. Palmer and Mr. Light, that will be a discussion we'd want to have not only in this committee, but with our wider tenant population as well, to hear their views on that. Okay, I do want to move on to item 6. I just would like to say that Councillor Clear, Councillor Batho and Councillor Gordon-Smith, I'm aware that you didn't have the opportunity to ask any questions in that session. So you will be given priority on the next paper should you wish to ask any questions. Okay, so moving on. We'll now be looking at the item, right page, item 6, which is a report for the new home scheme, the final business case for Southbrook Cottages at Mitchell Dever. Obviously, I mentioned earlier in the introduction to the meeting that we have both an open session for this paper, and then there are papers which are commercially sensitive because this is an open tender which will be looked at in exempt. So what I would like to do is to ask, I believe, Sunny, that you are going to be introducing this paper, is that correct? So if you could introduce the paper in the open session, we'll then take questions and a discussion, and then we'll see if members would like to go into exempt. So if you could just take us through the highlights of the paper, or indeed, Mr. Palmer, did you want to start?
I'll just say a few words before we start,
Okay.
just to draw members' attention to paragraph 7.6. And there's a correction in the penultimate paragraph to just say that where it says the estimated energy cost will be £170 a month, it actually should be less than £170 a month. So it should be much less than £170 a month. So just a couple of words were missed out in the editing of the report. So I'll just make that point before we start, and I'll hand over to Deborah to introduce the main report.
So, Mr. Palmer, I think it's that it will be £170 lower than the average.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Today we're presenting the final business case report for Southbrook Cottages in Mitchell Dever. In December 2020, the Council approved the outline business case for the development of 6 flats.
I'm sorry to stop you, Ms. Sunley. I'm aware, Councillor Wallace, that you wanted to speak to this paper. Are you happy to speak after the introduction? Thank you. I meant to ask you. Apologies. Go ahead.
In December 2020, the Council approved the outline business case for the development of 6 flats at Southbrook Cottages to submit a planning application and tender the construction of the 6 properties comprising 4 one-bedroom and 2 two-bedroom flats. Architecture PLB were appointed in late 2019 to investigate the site at Southbrook Cottages to consider the feasibility developer scheme not only for affordable housing but as a pilot scheme for low energy, low carbon housing to help make and inform future policy and development decisions in the context of the Council's declaration of a climate emergency. Following investigations, it was determined that the Passive House Plus standard could be achieved for the project. Passive House is a tried and tested model, providing an extremely high energy efficiency building standard, focusing on achieving excellent levels of internal comfort with an energy input as close to minimal as possible. It adopts a whole building approach with clear measured targets focused on high quality construction, certified through an exacting quality assurance process. Passive House Plus is a variation of Passive House where the little energy which is required is provided by renewables. If approved, the project at Southbrook Cottages will use a combination of increased building fabric efficiencies paired with renewable energy technologies such as ground source heat pumps, photovoltaic panels, and mechanical ventilation heat recovery units. The efficiency of the building fabric has been improved by increased U values and airtight construction. Careful consideration has gone into the size and shape of the building, as well as the size and position of each window. This attention to detail, along with the increased fabric efficiency, means that the building requires little additional heating. The mechanical ventilation heat recovery units means that each flat can be kept at a comfortable 21 degrees with a supply of fresh air, even when the temperature is as low as -10 degrees outside. It is proposed that hot water is provided through ground source heat pumps. The energy to top up the water temperature is provided by the photovoltaic panels. Passive House Plus certification will mean that the building will provide excellent levels of internal comfort at the same time as being extremely energy efficient, using 90% less energy than a typical house. The criteria of Passive House means that the building will produce 100% of the energy it uses on site, giving it the status of a zero carbon building in operational energy terms. And this will be reflected in the tenants' low energy bills. The result of all these measures is that the building will produce approximately 78% less carbon emissions than if it were designed to building regulation standards. There are only around 1,500 Passive House certified buildings in the UK, and even fewer still have achieved the Passive House Plus standard of performance. If approved, the project will be an exemplar scheme and will provide the highest standard of energy efficiency of any new home scheme the council has built. The purpose of this paper is to set out the progress and the outcome of the tender process, seeks authorisation to enter into a JCT intermediate contract with the preferred bidder, and to seek approval for additional capital expenditure in the approved budget in order to proceed with the provision of 6 new homes, contributing to the council's commitment to affordable housing and carbon neutrality targets. Following local community consultation and particular concerns by local residents about parking in Southbrook Cottages, it was agreed that additional off-site parking spaces should be provided. Consequently, a separate planning application was submitted for this, and approval was given in May 2022 for the creation of additional parking spaces by utilising the open grass verge in front of the existing properties at the top of Southbrook Cottages. Therefore, in addition, the report seeks authorisation to appropriate land under Section 122 of the Local Government Act in order to create the additional off-site parking. Following an open tender procurement process for all of the building works, including the additional parking, all tenders submitted were higher than the latest cost estimate and the original scheme budget approved. The significant increase in the cost of the scheme is due to the unprecedented increase in building materials, labour shortages and contractor pricing, factoring in the risk of further inflationary increases. The paper sets out the additional allocation of expenditure and budget required for the project. This also means that the scheme does not now pass the Council's viability criteria. However, the paper sets out reasons to progress with the scheme, chief of which is because it is an exemplar pilot project which would be built to the highest energy saving standards, which will be of maximum benefit for tenants, as well as meeting the net zero challenge.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Sunley. Councillor Wallace, would you like to come forward? And Councillor Wallace, I know you've done this before, but you have up to 5 minutes to make your representation today.
Thank you, Chair. Right, studies have shown that if we continue to build homes in the same way, then by 2050, England will have used up 104% of the country's entire carbon budget on just building homes. Therefore, it's vitally important that how we build homes changes, both to minimise the carbon impact of the building itself, plus the ongoing impact from heating our homes. Development at Southbrook Cottages is a step in the right direction. As stated in the project purpose, the homes aim to achieve the highest standard of energy efficiency of any new homes scheme the council has built. Each new home will have extremely low energy consumption and be carbon neutral. Moreover, the scheme will also allow the council to evaluate the benefits of building similar schemes in the future through the analysis of the challenges of construction, the ongoing repair and maintenance costs, and the impact on tenants in terms of reduced energy and water consumption, reduction in builds and quality of life. To this, I would add that the scheme also gives us the opportunity to review the business case associated with passive house developments. Overall, the project appears to be achieving the purposes set out by the council, and therefore, despite the cost increase, I support the project proceeding. However, I would ask the team to look into 2 specific issues. Firstly, the project is before committee today because of the need for a funding uplift, a significant portion of which is driven by the economic turmoil outside of the control of this council. However, in order for us to get the most value from this exercise, we need to understand how much of the cost increase is to do with economic conditions and how much to do with the construction process, as this will help guide the council on future developments. I would urge the team to try to quantify these different factors. Secondly, the market valuation is based on conventional built homes, i.e. homes not built to passive house standards. To support building going forward, we need to have home valuations that are appropriate to the building process and that take into account the massive cost savings and reduced energy bills that will be achieved by the homeowner. I would urge the team to investigate what can be done to modify the valuation process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace, for points well made. I just wondered either Mr. Palmer or Ms. Sunley, whether or not you could give some indication of what proportion of the uplift in costs is down to material costs and which is down to inflationary pressures, or the two sort of go hand in hand. If there's additional cost to materials, if they're going up because of inflation, then there's additional extra cost, if you see what I mean.
It's quite a tricky one, but a very valid question. When we embarked on the process of designing a passive house, it was before all the current turmoil, and we spoke to a council, well, Exeter Council, who do a lot of passive houses, and we spoke to them about what the uplift of cost is, and they thought it should be around 10 to 15% above a normal build. But that relies on local builders being familiar with how to build a passive house. We've not built any passive houses in Winchester. There will always be contractors who are pricing, they will price risk, and the risk is that they've not built a passive house before. So what we're getting at the moment is it's very difficult to untangle all of those inflationary factors. But in the long term, I would be disappointed if a passive house costs more than 10% of a normal build. But we are in slightly unusual times at the moment. It's actually quite difficult to make those comparisons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palmer. And in respect of your question around the valuation of these homes, obviously that perhaps is down to the market more than down to the council, but part of the monitoring, as I understand it, Mr. Palmer, excuse me just while I cough, is it will allow us to understand the cost of maintaining and repairing these properties in terms of the cost to the HRA for any ongoing homes that we build. Thank you.
Yes, I'll just to follow up on that. Valuers have to work with comparables, and there aren't really comparables for passive houses readily available on the market, as you pointed out. But the business case that we put forward for every one of our schemes is not just about the financial business case. There's a social business case, an environmental business case. It's the combination of all of those factors which should allow us to bring decisions, recommendations, should I say, to members to make decisions at the end of the day. So it shouldn't always be about the cost of a scheme. It's those long-term benefits need to be evaluated and within that process. But going back to the point, this is a pilot passive house project, so it will be very closely monitored over the following construction, well, during construction and then after construction, and those lessons that we've learned will be fed back into the process as we do more of these schemes.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer, and thank you, Councillor Wallace. I'm going to take questions until 12:15, and I'm going to be strict this time. I promise to allow Councillor Baffo, Councillor Clear, and Councillor Gordon-Smith to have the first option of a question. Do any of you want to raise a question? Councillor here, and then Councillor Horrell, I know you'd like to ask your questions next. Thank you. Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, this is a first ones that we're going to build. Could I just ask about the ground source heat pumps? And can you possibly tell me how deep are you planning to sink them? Because bearing in mind the water table, which is quite high, I believe, in that area, or are you actually considering using boreholes, which I did look up. They say they reckon they are more efficient than the subsurface ones. So that's my first question on that. And the other one is, and I know you mentioned the £170 per month, but it should be lower. How have you calculated the energy usage, i.e. for a one-bedroom flat? Is it possible to come back on that or not? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clare. Yes, so we have done extensive ground investigation works on the site. The soil conditions or the ground conditions are fair to say quite tricky on the site, and the engineer has identified that we would need piled foundations because of the tricky ground conditions. And I believe, I haven't got the information to hand, but I believe we will be putting boreholes in to accommodate the ground source heat pumps. Thank you.
In terms of the average energy costs, I mean, we've looked at, there's various comparative websites about how much an average one-bedroom flat's energy use would be. So we've just had to use an average, and then what we'll do is monitor closely how much energy a tenant does use. But I'd be disappointed if it wasn't 90% less energy. That's what averages say, but a lot depends on a person's lifestyle and how many people live in a property. So there's lots of factors, but after the first year of occupation, I think we'll be able to come back with hopefully some much more positive and accurate information.
Mr. Palmer, if I may, my understanding of passive house is that it's the thermal efficiency. So some of the energy consumption could be based on whether or not people are opening windows and doors because they're worried about ventilation. What, if anything, will we be doing with tenants both here and indeed with the new schemes in Whiteley and elsewhere that use the sort of heat interchanges to educate our tenants or potential tenants going in?
Yeah, clearly these houses are different than what we've built before. So we will be providing tenants with comprehensive information about how it works as part of the housing. That's it, home user guide. I knew there was I call it HUGS. That's all I can remember it as. I can't remember what it stands for. But so those documents will be updated, and we are trying to look and think about how we can advise tenants in the most user-friendly way about how the heating works, what they can and can't do. So it's really important to dispel the myths that you can't open a window, you do this, that and the other. It's really important that we tell people what their lives, how they should live in terms of achieving comfort in the property, so that the mechanical heat ventilation, heat recovery needs to be left on all the time. Even though you may hear it running in the background, it needs to be left on. And so these are the very simple messages that we need to get across to tenants.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Councillor Horrell, thank you for waiting patiently.
Chair, thank you. And as the one of the ward councillors for the Mitchell-Dever parish, you can imagine I'm very supportive of the scheme because it actually addresses a much needed requirement in the village for affordable accommodation. And I know we're focusing a lot today on the passive house plus aspect of the scheme, but at the very basic level, residents are desperate for this accommodation, and indeed more that we're working with the team on. I have two questions of clarification, please, Chair. In 1.5, we talk about increasing proportion of young people as a result of this accommodation. It's my understanding that this accommodation will be allocated on housing need as identified for the parish, and that may be for a different range of ages, not just simply for younger people. So I just want to reassure the parish that this is on housing need, and that there won't necessarily be a bias for the young, although I completely accept that that is a priority that we are hoping to address more broadly as a district. And the second piece is about the whole aspect of targets and KPIs. I wonder, Chair, again, whether this is a time for this committee and others to set that framework so that we can all understand what we want to measure and how we're going to measure it, and therefore make assessments going forward. Clearly, a lot of information about energy, but also other elements that we will learn as a consequence of this, and whether this prior to building is a time to set that understanding on the KPIs. Maybe your colleague who is in charge of service delivery might have a view on that as to how we do that as a council. Thank you, Chair.
So I think if we could just clarify 1.5, I think very much in that section, if I understand, we're just making the point that we have a priority to make sure we include young people. But if we could just clarify that it will be based on housing need, maybe Mrs. Knight?
Yes, Councillor Horrell's correct. It will be allocated through housing need, and those that have sometimes been on the housing register the longest with the highest housing need. But the nature of the fact that they're flats, it's likely, and they are general needs properties, then we are hoping that also that will help, young couples and young families and things like that, eventually. Singles, yeah.
And with the issue around KPIs, that's sort of out with this paper, but I can see, you're thinking through. I'm very keen that, and I've spoken to the team, that we evaluate both the energy efficiency, energy uses, but the impact on tenants, on what it's like to live in, and also those elements around repair and maintenance. I don't know whether Councillor Gordon-Smith would like to comment, but there is, I believe there's an ongoing review around KPIs, but I may be mistaken.
Yes, there is, because when I read through them, I can't understand them sometimes. They use very complicated units, and it seems to be obfuscation. And I've raised this matter with the officers, and hopefully they can put it in a form that simple-minded councillors can understand and other members of the public.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Ask one quick supplementary. In terms of tenant commitment to data.
Sorry, Councillor Horrell, just a second. I'm conscious I don't have very much time, but if nobody else has any other questions, Councillor Batho, but I will come back, Councillor Horrell, if we have a few minutes. Councillor Batho.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just to clarify, there was a separate scheme for the parking, which suggests that there's an 8 additional parking sort of spaces being provided. Are those for the actual sort of scheme that's being proposed here, or is that a general sort of increase for other tenants in that scheme? Thank you.
It's not specific to the scheme, so it's additional car parking for residents of that close. So it's not allocated, it's just casual car parking.
Councillor Gordon-Smith, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, this is a question for Mr. Palmer. I was slightly concerned the fact that the housing uses pretty high-tech solutions, poorer therm blocks, and air source heating or ground source heating, and it's finding people, contractors, staff that really understand these things. I mean, I think there's an innate conservatism amongst building contractors, And we wouldn't want the scheme to run aground in a few months' time when they can't get hold of people to do difficult high-tech stuff. Could you reassure me on that point?
Yes, there's a number of points I would make. The contractors went through an evaluation process, which was not just based on price, it was based on their ability to deliver as well. So they were asked to put forward examples. I don't think the contractors necessarily could pinpoint to building with Porthorn bricks before or any very individual element, but they are competent contractors who have worked on similar projects. So that's part of the evaluation process. Secondly, we sought advice before we designed these properties from Exeter City Council, and who built with Porthorn. And so we know it can be done. There has recently been issues with delivery of items from Europe. So all of this is factored within the project. If we did it again, if you ask me about lessons we've already learned, we might not have specified to such high degrees, but this was our first project, so we wanted to do it in a particular way. We've got a bench line, and we can then, evaluate future projects along the line. I agree with your comment. We don't want to just needlessly fill properties with high tech, which then becomes obsolete and difficult to maintain in the future. So that again is one of the lessons, if you like, that is emerging from this. And it may be that other technology emerges in the meantime, which takes the place of a combination of ground source and air source heating, which we're using at this project. But I take your point.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I am up to time, so again, I would like to ask whether Mr. Tact or Mr. Chafe or Mr. Light. Sorry, I have a cold, which I'm trying not to give anybody else, and it's making it hard to be perhaps as an effective chair as I might otherwise like to be. But is there anything you might like to ask in this open session? Obviously, more detailed questions around the finances will be done exempt.
Well, all I'd like to say is that it's houses that are needed in that area of Mitchell-Dever, and it's nice to see that there are going to be some affordable housing in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Light. We can hold that with us and take that forward in to debate those thoughts, but thank you. Councillor Horrell, if it's very, very quick, I would like to give you your opportunity to ask that question.
Thank you, Chair, and it's one that maybe Mrs. Knight or Mrs. Russell can follow up on, and it's just ensuring that tenants are happy to provide data to us once they occupy the accommodation to ensure that we can have our learning and that tenants are doing that in that knowledge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I will actually ask perhaps either Ms. Sunley or Mr. Palmer to start. Obviously, there is an issue of consent, but I believe we'll be looking at some smart monitoring of these properties.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yes, in connection with the, this is relating to the performance gap and the performance of the building. And Passive House does really guarantee a low performance gap. And that's because the Passive House designers have implemented a software suite, or the Passive House planning package, which models all the different components and how they work together and the way they interact with each other. And that means that you can very much predict how that building is going to perform. So as long as the construction's done as it's supposed to be done according to the design, the building will perform very close to what's predicted. So in terms of understanding the performance of the building, we will be proposing to take energy demand from the building and water usage from the building and get that data over the course of 1 year post completion, a year after the construction. And it is anticipated that our knowledge and understanding of that data will mean that we can learn and inform future projects. Obviously, there's data protection, but issues around obtaining that data. But we'll need to engage in conversations with our housing colleagues nearer to the completion time around how we anticipate and undertake that process.
Ms. Russell or Ms. Knight, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I just wanted to say that through our advertising process, through our viewings, through our sign-ups, through our new tenant visits and our 9-month visits, we'll be working with the new homes team and the tenants living in those properties so they understand the passive house and the benefits of that, and also how to do things so it doesn't impact on the building. So yes, you've got our reassurance. We'll work together.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Horrell, for raising the question around consent. I'd now like to move into debate on the open part of this paper before I ask members if you want to move into exempt on the other elements. Mr. Light, you've made your comment already in debate. Thank you for that, regarding how important it is to have these homes which are much needed in that part of the district, and where there's people literally waiting for them, I believe, Councillor Horrell. The scheme has been ongoing for some time now. Would anybody else like to make a comment in debate? I have Councillor Horrell. Anybody else? Councillor Gordon-Smith. Councillor Horrell, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, to reiterate as one of the ward councillors how important rural schemes are for our village communities to ensure that they continue to thrive. And this scheme has been long awaited. So as I said earlier, I know we're focusing on the passive house aspect, but it is much needed affordable accommodation. I note that it's being put forward at affordable rents, and that's perhaps a question for the exempt session. And also to ensure that as we go forward, we help in the education process with those who might find a passive house rather daunting, as Mrs. Russell said, and help them to understand it's actually a huge opportunity for them to have a new home, and also one that's very cost effective to run. I also welcome, Chair, which we've touched on briefly, the enhancement of the area with the car parking, because that was a huge concern for the broader residential group in that part of the village. And the fact that we've been able to do that has really abated fears about the impact that this development might have. So thank you to the team for accommodating that and working so closely with residents on their preferred approach. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, I would like to reiterate my support for this. This country has the most very poor housing quality stock, old-fashioned, very energy inefficient. And we hear constantly on the news at the moment, people saying how, I don't know whether I'm going to feed my children or heat the house. And here we are with a scheme proposed that will have costs which are in the order of 10% of the average. Well, you can imagine if we started doing this 20 years ago, we'd be in a much better situation. And I think also it's going to be a very, very valuable, it's a pilot study. There's a huge amount of information we're going to get from this. And hopefully we might also be able to use it as a stick to beat developers to do things to a better standard. We'll have a good example of the advantages, a good bit of publicity. I'm all for it. And I think country suffers from trying to do things on the cheap, and it tends to be disastrous in the long run.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon-Smith. Do I have any other debate from members on the committee at this point? Councillor Clear.
Very quickly, first of all, thank you, officers, for your presentation and answering all the questions so well. Yes, I'm very supportive of this scheme, this pilot scheme. I know it's just the pilot, but brilliant, exciting time ahead. And as officers said, they're keeping contact with tenants and make sure they get all the data through. So well done. And yes, very supportive of it. Thank you.
Just members of the committee, I would like to remind you that if we do go into exempt and come back, there will be an opportunity for an element of further debate. Councillor Powell, would you like to speak now?
Thank you, Chairman. The main impediment to this development and the approval of the additional budget was the viability. I am willing to set that aside, given the lack of comparable properties affecting the value. Given the example we will provide, the worked example, to not only other tenants, but other house builders and house owners. I very much hope we can give maximum publicity to the tenant experience of these properties and also the value to the planet. Rather a longer term objective, but nonetheless very important. I'm looking forward to seeing these homes being built, and I am supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, committee members. Mr. Light, we've heard from you. Mr. Chafe, is there anything you might like to add at this point, or would you prefer to speak perhaps later?
I prefer to wait till later, thank you.
Committee, is there a desire amongst the committee to go into exempt to look at the restricted papers in that exempt? I have one person who would like to go into exempt, others? Okay. As Councillor Horror would like to go into exempt, I would like to propose that we now adjourn the meeting so that we can look at the exempt papers. Can I have a second for that, please? Seconded. Thank you. Mrs. Graham, are we now going to pause the recording? Just for members who are here, members of the public, fortunately we have to ask you to leave, but we will invite you back into the room as soon as we start the open session again. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'll just pause the recording now. Thank you.
We are now resuming the Cabinet Housing Committee today on the 31st of October. Thank you for your patience. If you're listening online, we've now finished our exempt session and now back into public session. We're still looking at item 6, which is the final business case for the new home scheme at Southbrook Cottages, Winchester. Members, thank you for your consideration of this paper, both in open and exempt so far. Before we come to the recommendations and my closing comment, is there any additional debate or comments that people would like to make? We've obviously heard many councillors and Mr. Light, Mr. Chafe suggesting their support for this project, but is there anything anyone else would like to add at this point? Thank you very much, committee. From my own perspective, I look at this project very much as an exemplar project. It's something that we made a commitment to do in our carbon neutrality action plan to bring forward a pilot project of passive house homes. And indeed, Southbrook Cottages has been in the pipeline for some time. Councillors, including Ward Councillor, Councillor Horrors, made the point it isn't just it's an exemplar project, it will provide 6 much needed homes for residents who are waiting for them. I'm very much pleased that for the tenants who will take on these properties, building to such a high standard will not only make them carbon neutral, but it will have a significant, very significant impact on their energy costs, which in the current climate are a worry for so many people, particularly those who are seeking affordable homes through our social housing stock. The other key point I wanted to make is I've impressed upon officers and other members of the committee have impressed the need to monitor how well this scheme works, not only in terms of the energy costs, the ongoing repair and maintenance, but also in terms of the way that tenants live, how it affects their lives, how the house actually works for them. There's a phrase that's often used, lived experience. We can look at things on paper, but the actual living in a property is very different. So I'm keen that we do cover both of those aspects. Cabinet colleagues, as the decision makers on this paper, it is now down to us to go through the recommendations. So I would like to go through get agreement on the first 3 recommendations, if I may.
Agreed.
I'm going to read them out, Councillor Power. that we agree that the corporate head of asset management, the CHAM, be authorised to order and enter into a JCT intermediate building contract with Contractors Design 2016 edition, ICD 2016, to construct 6 properties at Southbrook Cottages, Winchester, for the sum as detailed in exempt appendix 2 with the Acacia Construction Limited. Second recommendation, that an additional increase in the current capital budget and expenditure of 719,000 be barred from the unallocated new build budget of 3 million, be authorised to bring the approved budget and expenditure up to the amount required of 1,990,513. Recommendation 3, that the corporate head of asset management be authorised to negotiate and agree terms for easements, way leads, and related agreements with utility suppliers, telecom, media providers, and neighbours, and relevant associated legal agreement in order to facilitate the development. Do I have your agreement?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'll now go on to recommendation 4, that the appropriation of open space be approved following the consultation exercise considered in May 2022 and in accordance with the requirements of section 122(2)(a) of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and the appropriation of the land for planning purposes in order to create additional parking at Southbrook Cottages for local residents. Do I have agreement?
Agreed.
Recommendation 5, that the corporate head of asset management be authorised to agree and arrange for a scheme to mitigate nutrients in perpetuity as required in order to discharge the relevant planning condition either on sites owned by the council and or purchase of nutrient credits from a third party prior to the occupation of the new homes located at the Southbrook Cottages site. Do I have agreement?
Agreed.
And the final recommendation, that the environment of 85,000 from the estate improvement budget be approved for the construction of the off-site addition car parking at Southbrook Cottages. Do I have agreement?
Agreed.
Thank you. And just for those listening, I asked what environment meant. And when you look it up, it actually means transfer, but it's the correct legal term in this situation. It's just not a commonly used term. Thank you. Members of the committee, we have been going for 1 hour and 50 minutes. I'd like to propose that we have a very quick 5-minute comfort break, and then we will move on to the second part of the papers today. Thank you. Thank you again for everyone who's listening online for that short interlude. We are now back in the Walton Suite with the Cabinet Housing Committee. We'll now move on to item number 7, which is a presentation by Amber Russell, our Head of Tenancy Services, around our Tenancy Sustainment Welfare Fund programme. That's quite a long title. If you would like to take us through it, and then of course there will be questions for members of the committee after this. After this, we'll move on to the final item on the agenda, which will be the housing services cleaning contract, because we've already covered both item 10, Brown Southbrook Cottages. Thank you, Mrs. Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to members of this Cabinet group today about the Tenancy Sustainment Service and the Welfare Fund. Just to give you a brief background of how we got to having our own Tenancy Sustainment Service within the housing team. Back in 2018, the County Council reduced spend on the lower level support services, so supporting people funding was removed. In 2019, A2 Dominion, who were delivering the floating support contract at the time, their service ended as a result of that removal of the supporting people funding. And so that year, Winchester, recognising the importance of the tenancy sustainment service for its tenants, gave a commitment to plug that gap. In 2020, the Housing Tenancy Sustainment Service was created, and that was including using 2 existing members of staff who predominantly provided financial support for tenants. But we also recruited at that time a specialist officer working in mental health and wellbeing. Then in 2021, the council committed to providing £500,000 worth of funding for welfare. That's post-pandemic, to help and support tenants at that time. We did speak to TACT at that time about how they would like that £500,000 used moving forward. And it was decided that that provision of money would include a designated sum for an assist grant to help tenants in financial crisis, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And it would provide funding for additional specialist staff within the Tenancy Sustainment Service, including a financial inclusion officer and a welfare social inclusion officer, and also providing a triage service for tenants. So in 2022, the enhanced Tenancy Sustainment Service came into place, and I feel that we are now delivering on our aims and outcomes for our customers, who are primarily council tenants. So there are aims there. I'm not going to read them out, but as you can see, we're all about delivering interventions to assist tenants, not just about a person-centred approach, but looking at wider social issues as well. So not just preventing that crisis, we're also looking at wider enhancements for those tenants that we're helping, and improving health and well-being inequalities, and working with partners as well is very important aim. This is the model that our Tenancy Sustainment Service follows. It's the 5 ways to well-being, and as you can see, it's a holistic service. So it's not just about physical health, it's mental health, helping people who may be isolated by keeping connected, financial well-being, which has also always been very important in our Tenancy Sustainment Service, and engaging and learning, so helping people grow and develop as well personally. So that's the 5 ways to wellbeing model. Achievements today, I'm not going to read them all out because there are lots of them, but I wanted to put them all down there just to show you how busy the team have been. And it's not just the tenancy sustainment team, it's the wider housing team as well. So we're talking about our income team as well when we're talking about our collection with care policy and breathing space. When we're talking about reuse, recycle and white goods and furniture, that's our housing tenancy team. So it's a wide range of achievements that cut across a number of teams that sit within my service area. But as you can see, they've been very busy, and we've had a lot of great achievements in a very short space of time since the team has been set up. Just a bit of stats, because I like to throw some stats in about the casework, the number of referrals that have been made, and the number that have been accepted. Just to highlight the main vulnerabilities for the people that the tenancy sustainment team are working with. As I said, we recruited a mental health specialist back in 21, and that is because mental health is the main vulnerability, tenants needing support. That is an important area for us. But as I said before, physical health, rent arrears, helping older people, there's a whole range of issues there that the tenancy sustainment officers will work with to try and overcome. And I've thrown in a few quotes as well, because I think they're really emotive if you read those, just about that lived experience, that personal experience that tenants have had when they've used the tenancy sustainment service. So I won't read them out because I know we're very short on time. So outcomes is also very important. We have a suite of KPIs, key performance indicators. So we are very closely monitoring and recording those outcomes, not just for us as a housing service, but for the wider sector as well. So we're helping with health, the NHS, by in the preventative work that we do. So yes, we've maximised £153,000. That's just in this financial year, Q1 and Q2. The team have prevented 13 evictions through the work that they've done. And as you can see there, the people that they're working with have commented on really quite enhanced improvements in their health and well-being. So they're really feeling the benefits of that tenancy sustainment service. And the graph is a breakdown of where that income's been maximised. So as I said earlier, we do work in partnership. We procure other partners who help us provide our tenancy sustainment work. And a very important partner who we've worked with for a very long time is Citizens Advice Winchester. So, that's just to give you a breakdown there. So as I said at the beginning, the assist grant is just one part of the welfare fund. And it's a crisis fund, really. So if people come to us in crisis, they need something, whether that's a school uniform for their child, or they can't afford to pay a utility bill, or they need to apply for something that then gets them back into work. That's what that assist grant, that crisis fund, is there for. So we've had this financial year 67 requests, and 49 of those we've accepted. We do have criteria for the assist grant. So if there are other services or other provisions out there that people can tap into, then we do put people in contact with those agencies first before using the assist grant fund. So far this year, we've spent about 30,000. We've allocated £30,000 to tenants in crisis using this money. And last year it was about 20,000, but that was from September till March. It wasn't a whole year. As I said, the grants provided a whole wide range of things for tenants, and I've just listed a few out there. There's just some current and future objectives. Although the team have achieved a lot, they've still got a very busy business plan, and there's a lot of work that they're doing this year and next financial year as well. I think with the cost of living crisis, which Councillor Ferguson's made reference to on a number of occasions, we're constantly re-looking at our business plan and reprioritising what we're doing to meet the current issues and what we're being asked for from tenants and from members. So it's quite a fluid business plan, but there's a lot of work still to do there. You have any questions on any of that, I'll be happy to answer them in a moment. And the final picture, I just thought I'd show you a picture of the team. and there they are. So who's missing from there is Sarah Wallace, who a number of you have already met. I know TACT have met Sarah on a couple of occasions now. So she leads up the team, and she also manages our sheltered and extra care teams as well. But they're the officers that are out there delivering the tenancy sustainment support to our residents as we speak. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Russell. A huge amount in a very few slides and very briskly delivered, given the time. Could I just ask, before I ask some questions from the committee, to what extent do you feel that there is increasing demand for this tenancy sustainment part of our work during the current cost of living crisis? And on the back of that, I know in speaking to Citizens Advice that they're telling me it's the complexity of cases that are coming forward. I wonder if we've seen that at the council. Perhaps you could answer both of those, please. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So taking your first question, yes, demand over the last couple of months, particularly for financial support, has increased significantly, and that is as a direct result of the cost of living crisis. So I know our income team have made a large number of referrals to the Tenancy Sustainment Service. The income officers themselves provide a level of support to tenants who are in financial difficulty. But when people have, as you to move on to your second question, complex financial challenges, debts, multiple debts, then they do then refer those cases on to the Tenancy Sustainment Service. So yes, we have seen a significant increase, particularly in financial cases. Complex cases, that's something that the Citizens Advice Bureau, Winchester are excellent at doing, and there we do refer cases onto them that are complex because they do have that real specialist knowledge in financial advice, and they can administer debt relief orders and other things that we can't do in-house ourselves. So yes, we do have, we are seeing more people with complex debts, but we do have the agencies that can support us to assist those particular tenants.
Thank you. Councillor Scott, I believe you have the first question.
Yeah, Amber, fantastic presentation, and it sounds some sections that there's overlap with local members, because we sort of pick up quite a lot of casework through this sort of nature as well. So one of the things I would say to you, where do the referrals come for this service? If they didn't know that the service existed outside, how would that come through? Because obviously we're learning now through this fantastic presentation, members, how do the rest of the members in the council know to tap into this service that you're offering? When and if the service does become too overwhelming for your staff, brilliant team that you've got up there, what would be the next step? Because obviously we are seeing the cost of living and physically and mentally the state of some of our residents and the anxiety that they're experiencing is becoming overwhelming. You guys, what is the next step? You're not feeling too overwhelmed.
Thanks for your questions, Councillor Scott. So yes, referrals. Referrals come through a variety of different ways. We do advertise our service on the website, and we have had literature prepared and promoted. We've also spoken about the service in the councils about Winchester magazine, and also our local e-newsletters to residents as well. So I do think that we have we've tried to promote the service, and we do get referrals from tenants themselves. We do get a lot of referrals from officers through their work who are concerned and make referrals, and we do get referrals sometimes from partner agencies as well. So we get referrals through for a variety of different ways. Second question about next steps. yes, conscious, and I put it up in one of the slides there, that the team are beginning to suffer with some kind of crisis fatigue, the situations that that are being presented to them and the range of options that they have available. Sometimes now we're seeing people where we can't see a lot more that we can do to maximise people's incomes because they're on all the benefits they're entitled to. They've swapped their energy providers, so they're on the best rate for them. So yeah, it is becoming definitely more challenging. One thing that Sarah and myself are working on at the moment is to try and procure some more specialist services like Citizens Advice Winchester, Christians Against Poverty, Step Change, other services that we support who can provide us with that extra specialist help. So yes, so if you do know of any agencies out there, members, we're always welcome to get recommendations from you as well, and referrals as well. When you're coming across your constituents who are experiencing real problems, yes, please get in contact with us and let us know. I know many of you do already.
I think Councillor Scott, you had a specific question about how do members know. So obviously the members on this committee know. So I'm assuming it may be possible to share this presentation with members across.
Yes, I'm very happy to include that in a member briefing.
And Mrs. Knight, I believe you wanted to add something.
I was also going to address your, Councillor Scott's comment around seeing people with more enduring mental health issues and health and wellbeing issues. And the team also concentrate on a lot of that work as well by trying to work with people through activities and trying to get people out of their homes and not just staying in their accommodation, to try and also find out what else is going on, whether it is a financial issue, whether they need help to access health services. And I think across the board of the whole housing division, certainly post-COVID, we've seen people with really enduring mental health issues now and gaps in those services. So I think it's fair to say that staff are dealing with quite increasingly difficult and challenging areas of work at the moment to fill that gap from the statutory agencies often.
And Mr. Botham, again, I think Councillor Scott was also asking the question around how are we looking after the well-being of our own staff who are seeing people in crises, because we work through people, and this is very much a people-intensive programme. I wonder if there's anything you could add around our commitment to our staff well-being.
There are a number of programmes that are operating at the moment around providing support and advice to our own staff. We have our own mental health advisors established throughout the organisation as well. I think some of the pressures that Mrs. Russell highlighted, I think, are becoming more and more acute as we speak. So that is something that I will feed back and make sure that we're taking full account of that, because it's those frontline teams that are really facing this probably more so than many other teams across the council, albeit everybody across the council is having some exposure to these sorts of issues.
Thank you, Mr. Botham. We obviously went through the COVID crisis, which had its own pressures and concerns and impact on staff, and how we face the pressures and concerns of cost of living, which is affecting all of us, to be frank. Councillor Horrell, I believe you had a question.
Chair, yes, please, if I may. On the charts, and thank you to Mrs. Russell for her presentation. You mentioned just briefly warm hubs, which are sort of a hot topic, but also you mentioned working with others, and that cross-section of making sure that we collaborate most effectively and signpost people effectively. Just to perhaps elaborate for us on how that is working, because we're all getting asked various questions. And also just in terms of the social inclusion partnership, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we used to have one. It may have been slightly different label. Is that sort of re-establishing that group that we had before, or does it have a slightly different orientation? Thank you, Chair.
So yeah, they're great questions, Councillor Horrell, thank you. Mapping services and stakeholders is a really important piece of work, and that's what Charlotte Bailey has been working on since she joined us late last year. As you all know, there are lots of agencies in Winchester that are doing great work out there, and it's about mapping all of those out so we know exactly who's out there doing what, trying to avoid duplication, and then identifying where those gaps are, and then trying to plug those, trying to fill those. So I'm very conscious that I don't need to employ lots of people to do this work, because there's lots of great people already out there that are established that could do it for us if we work in partnership with them. So yeah, that's a very important piece of work that we're doing this year, and I think that work will grow and will be even more important with the cost of living crisis and the work that the council's doing to support that. So yes, that's very important.
I just wanted to add something. Councillor Horry, as you know, we did announce a package of measures under the cost of living intervention, and one of those was calling that cost of living summit, which is scheduled for the 10th of November. And that very much is about, with our partners, coordinating and maximising efforts. And I know in the same way that our community stepped up during COVID, and we worked really effectively together, council and community and tenants, that the issue of warm spaces, the need to provide warm spaces, provide that network, that will be a key issue that we look at. So we try and bring everyone together. The summit also wants to look at, are there gaps? Where are the gaps? Where are we all trying to over-provide in some areas, but where are the gaps? And I think that's going to be very important. And I believe you've had an invitation to that summit. The Social Inclusion Partnership is a key outcome of the summit that I want to see established. I'm not aware that it existed before, but it may be before my time as a councillor. Mrs. Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we had a social inclusion group which was tackling homelessness and street activity at the time. We had all the statutory agencies around the table, and it was a very successful overarching forum, which then sort of morphed into the tactical group, which I believe is part of the community safety work. But we did recently talk about, is that needed again now? But during COVID, everybody was so busy, and all the membership were busy just delivering and getting through COVID. So it was paused, it has been paused for a couple of years. But yes, it's obviously something that you're considering with the summit. So that's a good place to pick that up.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. I have Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. Please do use members when you're trying to map local provision, especially on social inclusion, but also on support for financial problems with residents. I think we should all be aware of what's going on. I wanted to ask about the reuse and recycling of white goods and furniture. How do you manage the quality, and especially the PAT testing, and also the storage of these?
Yep, that's a great question. We have had an ad hoc scheme, I'll call it, for quite a few years now. But for some of the reasons you've highlighted, it's not been as effective as it could be. So one of the aims in our business plan for this year was to develop a specific process and procedure for recycling and reusing white goods and furniture. And part of the issue to date has been where we store those things. In the past, we've stored things in our own council garages, and dare I say, they've probably not lasted very long in those council garages. We've also stored things in other locations where we've had some space. But moving forward, we recognise that we need a proper policy and a proper process for this. So that's what officers are working with Osborne, who are our repairs and maintenance contractor, on drawing up that process at the moment. And we're looking to lease a storage unit very, very close to the centre of Winchester for a year as a pilot project, which we'll monitor to see how effective that is moving forward. So it's a really exciting project. We have, through the Assist grant, provided people with lots of white goods. And we're very conscious that as part of our voids, and we also get donations in other ways, that we're not maximising what people are gifting us. Instead, we're spending money that could be used elsewhere. So that's why we're developing and really firming up that process at the moment. So it would be good, I can come back to members at a future point and give you some more information about that. But we hope to get that established and finalised in the next couple of weeks.
One more.
Well, thank you very much. I will be brief. I'm also very well aware that comparatively low-cost interventions in household bills can make quite a difference. I'm thinking of thermostatic radiator valves and LED light bulbs. Is that on our list of interventions that we can make in order to reduce bills?
The tenancy sustainment officers offer a range of options when they're speaking to people, depending on what their situation is. So yes, if they are struggling with utility costs, those would be some of the suggestions that they would be liaising with the tenants about. Yes, definitely.
I am going to draw questions to a close on this. Just 1 second, Councillor Gordon-Smith. I'm very conscious of the time, and we have one more substantive paper to get through. Mr. Light, is there anything you wanted to ask or add?
One thing, as Amber knows, there have been some queries about shared housing and activities going on there first, but I think she explained that they've got to start somewhere. So they have started with the shared housing schemes. And are those activities, are they actually being well attended?
They've literally only just started, David. I think the programmes are going out to all the schemes this week. I think they're just being printed at the moment. So we definitely already keep a record of who's attending, numbers, and we will be doing an overview of how successful that project's been when that draws to a close after Christmas. We'll be doing an evaluation to then see what we're doing moving forward, to see how, whether tenants have enjoyed those workshops and other activities that we're doing. You mentioned that we focused on sheltered first, that's right, but then in our business plan, our aim is to encourage older people in the wider community to come and get involved in those activities, and also potentially younger people as well who are socially isolated, who would benefit and would be interested in coming to those schemes and being part of those activities as well. So I know Sarah and Charlotte will certainly be bringing an update to TACT in the forthcoming months on how successful that's been, and getting your input into what we do moving forward as well, what tenants would like to see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Light, for raising that important question, because it was a question that tenants raised at the latest TAP meeting. They were saying that it's not only older tenants who perhaps need those programs and that element of engagement. Councillor Gordon-Smith, if you can be very brief, I will allow you your question.
Right, I shall be very brief. Sorry, at the start, you mentioned you primarily dealt with council tenants. You also deal with problems with private landlords. Are those similar?
We also have an officer in the tenancy sustainment service who works with residents living in the private sector, and that's separately funded through the homelessness prevention grant. So yes, that officer will do work very similar to the other tenancy sustainment officers, but just with a different client group. So residents who need support, who are not living in council accommodation, to help them sustain their tenancies and improve their health and well-being.
Thank you, members of the committee, for your questions. I would just like to thank Ms. Russell and the tenancy sustainment team for all the important and excellent work that they're doing in this area. The presentation certainly shows the breadth of that work and the thoughtfulness of that work. And as I think, as we've highlighted many times already today, how much that work is needed and will continue to be needed as we move forward. But thank you for the presentation. Please thank your team on behalf of the committee. And as Councillor Gordon-Smith has highlighted, it isn't just our own tenants. There is also this support out there for people in the private sector as well. The committee, if we may, I would now like to move on to our last main item on the agenda today, which is the Housing Services Cleaning Procurement paper. This isn't actually a paper where we are agreeing the procurement itself. It's more that we're agreeing that the process can start and we look for a new provider. I believe, Ms. Russell, that you are also going to be introducing this paper. You're doing a double today. Would you like?
I am, with the help of my colleague Julie Mahoney from our procurement team.
Okay. Julie, would you like to join us at the table, just so you're sort of more in the room than in the seats at the back? Amber, but I believe you're doing the introduction.
Yes, I am, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The provision of cleaning services to housing's communal areas is a key service area for council tenants and leaseholders. Tenants and leaseholders require the cleaning service they receive to be of consistently good quality, which means the contractor meeting the defined service specifications whilst also providing value for money. Procuring a new cleaning provider is therefore a high-profile decision and one that the housing service makes in consultation with its residents. The report provides members with an overview of the intended procurement process for the cleaning contract. The current contract is being provided by YBC Cleaning Services, and this expires on the 30th of April 2023, and we're recommending that no further extensions of this contract are to be sought, and that a new contract instead should be established and entered into. Throughout the procurement process, and even before we've begun the procurement process, we've done a lot of consultation with both tenants and leaseholders, and this has been really helpful and has highlighted issues within the current service, together with improvements which we then transferred into the specification and the contract in readiness for procurement. And section 6 in the report sets out the extensive consultation which has already taken place so far, and what's also included in the procurement process moving forward. So just to summarise the paper, due to the limitations of the current contract and specification, officers are requesting that approval be given to commence a new procurement process. We are requesting a contract for the initial term of 3 years, with the option to extend for a further period or periods of up to 2 years. Provision for the cost of the cleaning service will be included within the HRA budget forecast for next financial year, and the provisional sum that we've put in at the moment is just over £270,000 per annum. And this sum will be adjusted once the annual cost of the contract is determined following the completion of the tender process. With regards to the tender process itself, we are recommending that an open tender process be followed, which is compliant with the PCR 2015 and the Council's contract procedure rules. Following our research, we feel an open tender process is the most suitable tender process. It gives us flexibility to tailor the opportunity, including contract requirements, which will enable local suppliers to bid. We're recommending a 2-stage tender process, and the preferred bidder will be the applicant with the most economically advantageous tender, calculated in accordance with the published evaluation criteria and scoring mechanism. To conclude, as I said earlier, the provision of cleaning services is a high-profile service for the council. It is really important that we procure a contractor who can consistently provide a good quality service and also provide value for money. We fully recognise the value of involving tenants and leaseholders and members in the procurement process while ensuring that we meet all our legislative requirements. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Russell. I actually would like to start with a question, if I may myself. When we look at the tenant survey results, it's very clear that our tenants are telling us they don't think the current cleaning is up to scratch. But they also very clearly tell us, and that does differ admittedly slightly between general and shelter schemes. It may be that the shelter schemes get cleaning more often than our general schemes, maybe frequency. But there's also that tension between, they tell us quite clearly they don't want to pay any more for the service. I just wondered how in the procurement process you're going to manage that tension between wanting better quality but not wanting increased service charges and having to pay more for the cleaning. Thank you.
Excellent question that we have discussed quite extensively as well. You'll note that the recommendation is that the evaluation criteria is based on 60% cost. So it is taken into account that the fact we've talked about the cost of living crisis throughout today and the economic turmoil, that cost is paramount to us, and that's a very clear indication to bidders as well. But we have also taken on board about the quality aspect, and that is everything but price, and the fact that very clear feedback from residents is they want a consistent service. So what has been woven throughout the specification, and it's also about the evaluation, is how the contract will be monitored, what key performance indicators will be included, how we can include digital to keep people informed of what's going on, whether that be residents, whether that be council officers, whether that be the provider. So we feel that we have covered that, but that's why we are recommending that it's a 60% cost, 40% quality evaluation for those very reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have any questions? I'm going to allow Councillor Power, then Councillor Clear, and if Councillor Rowe doesn't mind, she can come up in third position.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is about water quality. I'm no doubt you're aware that in smaller sewage treatment plants there are no phosphate washers. Would it be possible to make it a condition of the tender that phosphate and bleach-free cleaning products are used as cleaning materials? It could be a consideration. My concern is we have, like Mrs. Russell said, we have spoken extensively to residents. We've also spoken to suppliers in the market. And some of the feedback that we've had is they're very happy to provide biohygiene products, but the cost could be up to 150% more. So I'm just mindful of service charges and costs. And I think what we are considering doing, depending obviously feedback from today, is it's something that we'd want to work with providers going forward and with residents as well, but maybe not to mandate. But we could ask the question in thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
And can I just ask as a supplementary to that, you, Councillor Power, pointed to there are specific parts where we don't have that sewage treatment and others there is that sewage treatment. Is it something we could ask for specific parts of our stock where we know where there is the problem, or is that too complicated, too detailed?
We can certainly ask the question. I think it might be quite complex, and there might mean that they've then got to carry around 2 sets of equipment and remember which one to use at which site. So I wouldn't want to overcomplicate, but then we, as Julie said, we do want to speak with the contractor moving forward on how they can assist us with our climate, the aims of the climate emergency, what we're trying to achieve. So that's not just the materials they use, that's also the vehicles that they use. So there's a whole range of things which we'll be discussing with them at the tender process that will form part of our questioning, won't it?
Thank you very much. Councillor Clear.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, residents are not that happy with the cleaning services at present. You've mentioned, and I read about a robust monitoring. Is there any way, can I ask, how often do you monitor, how you monitor, and how you are going to go about it in the future, please?